Welcome back as we continue our series on reflections on memorization. Verse 6, David says, "This poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles." So now it's very interesting that David now begins to talk about himself in the third person. Before he says, "I sought the Lord, and the Lord heard me and delivered me from all my fears." But now he says, "This poor man cried out." This is, of course, before David was even king in Israel. He was just a young shepherd boy tending sheep on the backside of his father's fields while his brothers were serving in the army. He wasn't wealthy, he didn't have a lot of means. And so David looked at himself and he says, this poor man who had no wealth, he had no claim to position or for attention. And he says that even me, without any earthly reason why you would pay attention to me, heaven did not ignore him. Our position on earth has nothing to do with whether God is willing to listen to us in heaven. We can get heaven's attention even if we're the lowliest person on the earth, at the lowest position, and we are devoid of most of the earthly goods and comforts of life. You can cry out to God, which means that you can seek help outside of yourself. This poor man cried out, David says, and the Lord heard him. You know, when we say that God has heard us or heard someone else, the question becomes, how do you know? The hearing of God is not something we get to watch on TV, or we can check the recordings and say, oh, this is God listening to your prayer. The only way that we know that God is heard is when we see the results and the answers that come in response to our prayers. And David says, the way that he knew that God had heard him as this poor man crying out to God, he says, he saved him out of all his troubles. Think about this. We started off with all his fears. Now we're moving to all his troubles. There's not a person on this planet that doesn't have trouble, that isn't going through trouble. Maybe you're going through trouble. You have problems in life, and sometimes they overwhelm us and we think, man, I wish I could just move to a city where there's no problems. But David says, when you cry out to God and you're going through all these different troubles, just like your fears, there is no trouble that God cannot save you from if you are willing to cry out. Do not keep that trouble to yourself. Do not bottle it up. Do not hide it. Do not cover it with a smile. Do not pretend that that trouble doesn't exist, but cry out to God and trust that He is able to save you, even when you can't save yourself from all your troubles.